even. This is weird because normally I don't do an intro for the second one.
Okay.
But this second one is a continuation of the first one, so I don't know if I should. I don't know. So sure, let's do. Hello and again, welcome to Bit Depth. I'm Santiago Ramones.
And I'm Billy. No,
Whoa,
I'm
okay.
Dr. Pants.
Yeah.
David Broyles.
Still across from me because this is, I mean, that's how we do things. But real quick, okay. We didn't finish the first one because I asked too many questions and he
I
gives
talk
too
a
many
lot.
answers. So the second half of the podcast, I get into the really deeper, broader philosophical questions.
Right.
So I always start with, what is the role of spirituality or religion in your life?
It's a hard one to answer these days. I think, well, for the past 17 or so years, I have self-identified as Christian, but I don't know. It didn't take long. Like, it didn't take long. I didn't get very far into those 17 years where I felt like I had to start offering that identification with certain caveats. I think that these days, well, and I should say, before that, I grew up Unitarian Universalist, which I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I know the term universalist. I'm not as familiar with the term Unitarian.
Okay. Well, really at this point in history and in the history of Unitarian Universalism, that church and that sort of, overall religious body sort of just really serves, and there may be some of my UU friends and people who are, UU clergy or whoever who might disagree with this in some way, but my perception, certainly growing up and to this day, is sort of that community kind of serves as sort of like a catch-all community for people of various sort of like liberal religious ideas, and who don't feel like they fit anywhere else.
Yeah.
There are people in the Unitarian Universalist Church who probably identify as atheist.
Yeah.
But then there are others who probably identify as more maybe not atheist, maybe secular humanist, or maybe agnostic, or maybe, but then at the same time, there are also people who, there are maybe even people in the UU faith community who skew towards, things like Wicca or, it was certainly, but they've always been a community that wanted, that celebrated diversity on every level. They were welcoming congregations for the LGBTQ, et cetera, whatever community long before most, mainline Christian churches started to kind of turn that direction. And so what became clear to me probably 4 or 5 years into my life as a quote unquote Christian was that, like, there was never going to be anything about there was never going to be a time in my life spiritually where whatever I believed and however I operated wasn't somehow informed by that upbringing.
Yeah.
Which was an incredibly freeing thing to come to terms with, because you know, you it was a unique enough experience, but also, you know, carried with it enough sort of like formative sort of ideas that like there were things that, you know, I certainly believed and still believe that I do not think are incompatible with Christianity, but at the same time, some people might argue that there are issues there or whatever, and it's like, well, and I but I think it's important for me to keep in mind that like no, there's I just you can take the man out of UUism, but you can't necessarily take all the UUism out of the man, and so. Now, in terms of sort of like a more strict definition, like the word Unitarian comes from, like the idea that it is not Trinitarian. Like they are identifying themselves as they are identifying themselves as people who do not necessarily acknowledge the divinity of Jesus and do not acknowledge, like, if there's a God, like they acknowledge sort of like the idea of the God being the one being as opposed to the three beings or whatever. And then you said you were familiar with the idea of universalism. Universalism is the idea that like, well, if there is some sort of salvation or afterlife, like,
Everyone does.
we're all going
Yes.
to the same place or whatever. And so, but then from there, they sort of, used sort of those. And there was Unitarianism and there was Universalism, and then they came together and became this thing. And like, but then from there, like eventually, just like I said, it kind of became this sort of springboard for like this overall sort of like liberal religious community. And it depends on where you go. Like in the down here in the Bible Belt, my Unitarian church that I grew up with, which is, still exists. It's at Northwest 13th and Dewey down in, where what we call Midtown now. There were a lot of people in that community who were really skittish of the idea of like ever acknowledging the idea of God as any sort of certainty.
Sure.
Like, whereas it's like, well, we got to be careful there because, we don't want to, it's like some of us are more comfortable with that than others and blah, 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 blah. And like, whereas like a friend of mine who, she grew up UU in Texas, but then moved to Chicago for college and a good chunk of her adult life after that. And, she's like, they talk about God a lot more up here, and the Unitarian Church is here. And like, and everybody's a lot more comfortable with the idea of like supreme being at whatever. Like it's not, it's not Jesus or whatever, but like, but then I think there's, of course there's also this idea of like, sort of the more pluralistic idea of like, well, it comes from the universalism thing of like, well, everybody, you can believe what you want to believe about blah, 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 and, et cetera. So anyway, it's interesting that like there are regional differences in terms of how comfortable people in the UU community are with the idea of God. I think that since the day moment whatever where I decided that like I think there was certainly a time in my life where like I gravitated towards Christianity was like a time where for me in my life at that point the open-ended nature of UUism was not cutting it for me. And I needed something more concrete and more structured in terms of belief system in my life at that time. And I felt, and there were just a number of factors that were sort of leading me in that direction. And so that's where I ended up now. And I certainly, I don't know that it would be, I don't think it's inaccurate, at least at this point, to still, call myself a Christian, because I feel like I still, acknowledge the, sort of the undeniable like validity and, sort of, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, like, but the teachings of Jesus seem to still like those. If you're, people talk about there's a term that sort of has started flying around in the last little while, that the term red letter Christian, which is like the people who are like, no, we're really focused on those red letters in certain pressings of the Bible, where like the stuff that Jesus says is in red letters. And like, I think there's a part of me that feels like, well, I'm definitely kind of closer to that category at this point. I don't know if there are people within, the wider body of Christianity who are, pushing a universalist idea at this point too. Like, I think the guy like Rob Bell, like I think kind of come out as being, universalist, but still considers himself Christian. I don't know if I could say for sure that that's where I am at this point, but there's certainly a lot about sort of the more conservative aspects of Christianity that, rubs me the wrong way. And I feel like that is sort of, you're interpreting things in a way that I feel like it does more harm than good. And it's not helping people. And if like, there's one thing that I think Jesus wanted to do, it was help people. And I think so that's definitely sort of the general sort of spot I find myself in, and it's still working itself out a little bit at a time. There was something else. There was another thought there. It's a hard thing to talk about sometimes. I think that. Well, and then from there, like certainly, and I don't know if my in-laws are going to listen to this podcast. Certainly the aligning of the more conservative aspects of Christianity with the idea of Donald Trump being an acceptable leader, but not only an acceptable leader, but a leader that is allegedly, endorsed by God or whatever, like it is sort of certifiable insanity to me. And I cannot make those connections. And I worry about I feel like there are just some really, really major leaps that have to happen there to make that even a tenable position. And I was in a shaky spot with some of it before that, but then that made things even shakier. But I think that, I try and just be sort of like, it's just wherever I'm at is okay, and it's all a journey anyway. And if I'm still trying to be someone who loves other people, and there's always places where you fail to do that, but if I'm doing that, then like, okay, well, all right, I'm kind of doing what I think is the most important part, and then from there it's like, okay, we can put some of that other stuff on the back burner, and maybe eventually it'll work. Some of it'll work itself out. I don't know. Long answer to your question. But
so I can tell that you're a very compassionate person. So where does that compassion come from?
I was raised to be compassionate. I was raised by parents who were generally compassionate. Every person who, I try and be compassionate, and of course, every person who even like tries to practice compassion like runs into moments where for some reason it's like, and that's where my compassion ran out. And I think that my parents would say, and that, you know, and they've had moments where their compassion ran out. But I was raised by compassionate people, and I don't know, um, and I think that, and maybe I think there were some formative experiences sort of growing up that kind of helped me realize what compassion really looked like, and what sort of, and I think, whereas, you know, maybe I moments where I thought like, well, this seems like the way things should be, and then, you know, people would come along and be like, but that doesn't really work for me
Yeah.
because this and this. And I'd be like, oh, okay, maybe I need to rethink this. And I think the end result of some of those things was, well, okay, we need to try and err on the side of that as much as we can. And I, you know, and it just never, rarely does sort of like a major sort of issue, or what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of major issue, or conflict of any kind,
Right.
or anything like that come across my field of vision where the answer does not at least appear to me to be, well, the more compassion would help. Like, you know, I mean, and it, so just the longer I live, the more it becomes clear to me that, like, well, that seems to be the answer a lot of the time. And I think that, I mean, and there are some people who are like, well, the answer is Jesus. Well, it's like, well, what is, you know, what would Jesus say? He would say, well, you know, like, you know, love them, be compassionate, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah.
yeah.
Like, and so I think that it just, yeah, just as, and I was compassionate before I started identifying as Christian. And so it wasn't a big leap to be like, and we're gonna, you know, really try and practice this, like, you
Yeah.
know, and so yeah, that's, I don't know, that's the best answer I have for that
Yeah, yeah.
question. I can't remember a time where didn't sort of like at least edge in that direction. Like, certainly childhood is challenging, and you know, there's always things that you're learning, you know, how to approach things compassionately as a kid. But I just, you know, I was lucky to have parents that I feel like maybe taught and modeled that well. So
Sort of a more, I guess, I don't know if it's a specific question, but how does someone be good? What is morally good in Dr. Pants's book?
morally good. I don't know. Don't be a dick. You know, I don't. It's such a. It can be such a loaded question, or like you feel like any answer you give is going to end up being perceived as a loaded answer by somebody. I think that, you know, doing your best not to hurt people, either physically or emotionally, like, that's about as close as most people are going to get. Like, and I think that, unfortunately, you know, I think the biggest problem for me, and the place where a lot of the place where, you know, for me, a lot of what certain sections of the church teach about certain things, and the way those things are sort of perceived or received by people outside of that world, like, you know, that's where things really start to fall apart, because it's like, if people are really hung up on, you know, it's like, well, you know, on aspects of, sexuality or whatever it is, not just, orientation or anything like that, but like, when you should have sex and who you should have sex with and blah, blah, blah. Like,
Right.
all that kind of thing is, it just, it just clouds the conversation, or it just mucks things up without, so much. And people don't, it's like, when I think, some people would argue, well, it's like, well, but there's that. And then, but we're also about the love and the whatever. But like, I think that there's an aspect of like truly sort of, prioritizing, wanting to love and be compassionate with people, that sort of does sort of make some of those other things sort of melt away. And like, it certainly makes many of them secondary. It makes a lot of them, tertiary or further. And so, and there are people who would argue, well, your idea of like, not doing harm to anybody, that's, it's too permissive, or it's too this or that or whatever. But but ultimately, I think that we're just limited in our capacity as human beings, and there's not the if we can there's only so much we can focus on at any given time. And so if you're going to focus on something, like focus on, being kind and not hurting people, because ultimately, like, that's probably it's about probably the best thing that you can do. And it's going to, if trying to focus on all these other things that are supposedly morality issues or whatever, in addition to that, like, eventually somewhere you're going to lose sight of the plot. Like, that's just my personal opinion. I'm sure there are a lot of people who would disagree with that, but it seems to me, it's like there's only so much we could possibly be capable of within our limited human means. And so, like, it seems like that should be the priority.
Yeah.
So,
and always the qualifier that, like, these are your opinions.
Absolutely.
This is, like,
absolutely.
not only just your opinions, but your opinions at this point in time. So it's like,
I can come back next week. Forget everything I said.
So, oh yeah, here's my straightforward questions before I get on to more vague topics, although the straightforward questions are still pretty vague in themselves. God, question mark?
I mean, generally, probably. Like, yeah, I mean, I'd say that at this point I would still identify as a theist in some manner. I think that there's a lot of, people need to do a lot of work in terms of, really, really sort of internalizing and some of the things that they say they believe about God. Like, and I think that there's no, I certainly don't believe that God is by any stretch of the imagination definitively a he of any kind. I don't, but I mean, I still generally, most of the time, yeah, the answer would be yes, probably.
And then the other one is free will, question mark.
Also, yes, weirdly enough. And that is that, with the full awareness of, like, the potential mucky muck and contradictions that those two yeses entail. I try and be someone who doesn't necessarily feel like I have to have all the answers, which is hard. a lot of I think a lot of what drives sort of the UU people is the idea of like, well, don't, if you can't reconcile something and make sense of something, if you feel like you don't necessarily have the answer, then you can't still allege to have the answer. Like,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like, the older I get, the clearer it is to me that like life in this world, this existence possess inherent contradictory things, and sometimes those things can literally can coexist and not necessarily screw anything up if you don't constantly poke them with a stick or whatever.
Light is a wave and a particle.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's a good example. But like, I think that there's no doubt that like it's very clear to me that choices I've made have led me to where I am. And then there are other moments where it also feels clear to me that like there was some sort of it's possible there was some sort of outside influence. Like, and so but at the same time, but I don't think my own personal experience does not lead me to believe that those things have to be mutually exclusive.
Sure.
As weird and as logic defying as that experience is, but whose experience in their life is 100% illogical? I don't think anybody's is. By the time I was 18, I had seen and heard any number of things that I didn't necessarily have an explanation for, and so I think that definitely is something that I remembered and have remembered my whole life. It's like, you've seen some shit that doesn't really I'm not sure how to explain what that was, and so I think that that helps kind of keep me weirdly grounded in the idea of inherent contradiction or whatever.
Sure. So we were talking about Trump and such, and so one, it's how do you feel about how the political climate and also just social climate or whatever has been lately, and what do you think we can do to try to improve that?
I mean, there is no doubt that for me that like the past year and a half especially has like even in my life where were already any number of things that were difficult, like getting out of bed every morning in a world where some of the stuff that has been happening has sort of been increasingly difficult on some level. I don't, I hope that, there is at least, if not an end in sight, in terms of, hopefully, potential, criminal investigations finding their way to a satisfying end. If there's not something there is, I have hope that there at least is some sort of counterbalance coming in terms of, maybe a shift in the legislative branch come November. Because, there's at least got to be like, our that's this the judicial branch of the federal government doesn't totally suck at this point, but like, but we've got to at least get some balance and some things, back in order to sort of try and kind of minimize the damage in these last couple of years of this presidential term. And I think that I don't. It's hard because like in a world where I went into election night in 2016 certain that there was no way that guy would win. Like, and then he did. Like, it's scary to be like, okay, well, if not this, then this, and then if not this, then this. Like, you kind of can go down the list of like, okay, well, if he doesn't get indicted and is forced to resign, then we can maybe create some balance by electing different congresspeople in midterms. But then if that doesn't happen, then at the very least, we'll vote him out and he won't get a second term. Like, but then after that, it's like, but if not that, then then what? Like, violent revolution and he is deposed. Like, I don't have any idea. Like, and so, and I try, and it's the hardest part of all of it for me is the fact that like, because I'm a white male, and especially because I'm a white male who like, is in a somewhat, I'm in a little bit of a privileged position financially because of my wife's family and because she works for their family business and things like this. And I can turn off Facebook and not read about necessarily everything that's going on. And for the most part, my life continues undisturbed. And so alternately, I am either sort of psychologically battered because I'm making the choice to not do that and not operate out of my privilege, or I finally get to the point where it's too much and I have to turn it off for a couple weeks and I, beat myself up every day for like basically taking advantage of my privilege. Like, and so, and that's, it's the hard, and I've talked to any number of people who they totally, they feel the exact same way. They're like, I could turn it off and like, and it wouldn't immediately affect me, to not know, it's not like, being, it's like if you're a white male or even a white female, like it's not dangerous for you to not know about ICE and all that scary shit, because you're not like, increasing the chances of getting surprised by some sort of, dude at your door trying to freaking deport you. Like, and I think that, but it's just incredibly fucked up. And I'm sorry, I don't know how you feel about profanity. I did the S word earlier,
you
and
can
now
say
I'm like,
anything.
and that. But it's like finally, it's like I can't say it any other way. And so, so yeah, so it's on the one hand, like, yeah, it's just a constant struggle between like, 'cause, like, it's like I want to try and preserve whatever I can of like my mental health, and like there's steps that I can take that like, oh, I'm a better, husband and father today because I read less Facebook, but like, but then it's like, and yeah, you're lucky that you can read less Facebook and it doesn't, put you in any danger to be less aware, or less news or whatever it is. And so, yeah, it's very, very strange. And I hope that, like I said, I hope it's like, hope it's this, then if it's not that, then it'll be this. and I don't know. I don't know what we do if we get to, November 2020 and somehow like that asshole still isn't out of there. Like I don't know what we do then. But yeah. So I don't know. I think that I don't know if I answered the question.
It's something. On a different note, and I've been trying to tell myself to ask this question more,
Okay.
because we find ourselves faced with that fear, or anxiety, or whatever it might be. I try and inject a little bit more positivity into
Sure.
the podcast by asking, "What makes you happy?"
Finding the time to write music makes me happy. My children make me happy when they're not being complete pains. That one of the, for the benefit of the listening audience, my daughter is 5.5 and my son just turned 3. And in the words of another family that we met at the Kerrville Folk Festival a couple weeks ago, we are still, quote, very much in the thick of it. Like they have 3 kids, and I think the youngest one is like 10 or 11 or something like that. And they're like, oh, we're past all that now. Like they're like, a lot of our life just kind of like works on autopilot, and like they will get, if they get hungry, they sometimes even, they feed themselves some of the time, like that kind of thing. And whereas like in our life, it's like, okay, no, every mealtime has to be a conscious effort on the part of the parent to make sure the child gets fed, and every all the bedtime is very much a routine that both my wife and I have to be like focused and involved in. But anyway, all that to say that, but they're incredible kids, and they are, they already do amazing things, and it's, and I find, and now, and when, especially after like, again, post grad school and all that, that like, there's a part of me that's like, the insanity of trying to do that with 2 kids that were the ages they were. Like in the wake of that being over, like I'm finding, more reserves in myself in terms of being a more present parent. And so, but that ultimately, it's like so many things, it's like, the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And so that's definitely the case there. Certainly listening to music makes me happy, because of the generation I am, like digging around and like like obtaining music makes me happy, probably on a level maybe that it shouldn't. Like I get probably a very unhealthy amount of pleasure out of just like, beholding my iTunes library. Oh, look at all this great stuff. Like, but certainly, like, engaging in other, or like enjoying other creative things, both, or like enjoying other forms of art makes me happy. Films, and haven't read as much in the past few years. I've typically been, at least at most points in my adult life, a reader of things, of novels and things like that. And I just love I love hearing about other people doing creative work makes me happy, and like seeing my students do creative work makes me happy, and and my job makes me happy. Like I really do love doing what I'm doing, and so yeah. I'm pretty lucky that like there's a lot of the stuff, a lot of the stuff that I get to do on a regular basis is stuff that I enjoy and does good things for me. And it certainly wasn't always that way. And, and so yeah, all those things. Sure, this isn't anything important.
Right.
No.
Last thing that I have is what advice do you have for people?
You know, be nice. I think, be nice, be kind, be compassionate if possible. I think it's interesting. I was talking to some people last night and talking about how the social structures in our world have sort of reached sort of this crisis point of basically we all of us have sort of kind of become more isolated, and you can argue about there are people, there are things about certainly like social media and all that stuff and the internet that have made me feel less alone and less lonely in this world. But then for a lot of people, it works the other way and all that. And like the idea that however many years ago, 75, 100 years ago, whatever, the neighborhood in an American city was like the main social construct, and then people knew their neighbors and whatever. That being said, I totally acknowledge that, at this point in time, we're acknowledging the idea of social anxiety, and that, nobody should be forced to be in certain social situations if they don't want to be. I think, but my it's like be kind, be nice, be compassionate, and love people and interact with people as best you can within your ability. From that perspective, don't be afraid to actively pursue the life that you want. Because for a lot of us, that's the only way that we're going to get it, or get any of it. And we may not ever get like the whole life that we want, but certainly it's like getting part of the life that you want is better than not getting any of the life that you want. And so go after it, and don't let things don't let things like logic or perceived realities stop you, because a lot of it is just perception, and it's not necessarily doesn't necessarily have to be true 100% of the time. That covers a lot of ground, the life you want socially, the life you want in terms of the romantic relationship or relationships, the life that you want as career wise, the life that you want in terms of just your interests, or whatever it is, it covers a lot of ground. So yeah, so I think that covers it in terms of what advice I would give people.
Given that this is the second podcast, and I try and make the second one a little bit more conversational, but this one ended up being an interview continuation.
Right.
To, I guess, force a conversationalness. Do you have any questions for me?
I don't know. I'd be curious to know your answers to any number of the things that we just talked about. I wonder sort of if you, I know, so you're pursuing a master's in composition.
Mm-hmm.
You're still sticking with composition. We haven't changed our minds or anything like that.
Not yet.
What like do you have goals in mind in terms of like the stuff you want to write before it's over, before the master's is over, or like are you sort of like willing to sort of like, let your ship sail where it's sent by, teachers or whatever, or
It's a little of both, actually. I have goals, as far as I have like lists of things that I'm like, I have an idea of something that I want to eventually make. And it can be as simple as a piano piece,
right.
or as complex as I have this series of pieces that I've been doing through my first semester of my master's, which is I call it machinations, but it's like a sort of Black Mirror through music. And so like Black Mirror is it tells different stories, but also just like self-contained.
Right. Yeah.
And so my machination series is telling stories in technology and the future through musical ideas. And so I have those that are sort of sending me on a path. I've already done 3 and I'm working on a 4th. The first one was just like machine sounds. The second one was an AI waking up and achieving sentience and then becoming a god.
Right.
The third was a story of androids rebelling to sort of get to heaven. There's a whole longer story behind that. And then this 4th one that I'm working on is a almost Gregorian chant-like piece that is a post-apocalyptic cult that worships a computer. So I have those ideas trailing me forward that I'm like, whenever I get more inspirations for those, I'll keep moving forward on. But then other stuff that's just like piano piece.
Right.
Do that.
Yeah. No parameters per se yet.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's a bit of those things. And next semester I'm taking technically 3 composition classes because I'm insane. But because I'm doing like composition with Dr. McGrill, I'm doing electroacoustic with Dr. White, and I'm doing jazz composition.
Oh.
So
yeah, I didn't hit that. I probably should have hit that.
But yeah, so I have those creative goals. I think just generally artistically, I'm more latching onto the idea of wanting to tell stories with music, whether or not they be my story of my life or just hypothetical stories or fiction or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
That's sort of been my inspiration for a while. I've been really inspired by like clipping and Janelle Monáe and Kendrick Lamar, and so like these people that not only just make music but also create a whole story, a whole experience, a whole thing, and that's kind of what I'm going for with my music. It's a long-winded way of saying, yes, I have things.
And it's interesting. The storytelling aspect definitely is appealing for me sometimes too, but I think that's also part of one of the things that I love about music is like, I could consciously choose to tell a story, but I don't have to.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and I can still, make all these things happen, and they can, they can totally be open to interpretation
Yeah.
of what on earth that meant, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
So,
and honestly, it kind of started out as like a tool,
yeah, sure.
because it was like, all right, I have a verse, I have to say something different in the next verse, and so it's like,
Yeah.
but in a way, like songwriting in general is kind of telling a story because the structure of the typical song is
Yeah.
verse, which starts something,
Starts the story.
chorus says the feeling,
Yeah.
second verse
Middle of
expands
story.
on the story,
Right. Yeah.
chorus reiterates the feeling, bridge, oh, something different is now
Right,
happening
yeah.
in the story, and then chorus
Yep.
finishes out the feeling because it
Yeah.
all is that same theme. So I mean, telling stories through song has been an effective way of me sort of having songs happen.
Yeah.
But also it's a little bit of the insecurity of like, I don't know, like I'm 22. I don't have that much life experience, so it's not like I have that much to say about myself.
Right.
So I feel like if I'm telling more hypothetical stories of
Yeah, which is interesting because I think that maybe I think it well, yeah, I think at 22 I was to the point where like I was sort of like I was like making shit up like and starting to make shit up but not but I was making a lot of stuff up that I'd still told as if it was me.
sure.
Which was interesting. Like, and I think, and that's one of the interesting things about like, it's sort of the irony of young songwriters, like, is that like, and it's not, this isn't a criticism, it's just an observation. Like that, most of the students in class, like, they're very, very caught up in sort of like this very like, internal navel gazing, like these are my feelings, this is my experience, this is my blah, blah, blah. Like, and I think, and and to be fair, like I mean, I think there's a lot of us. That's part of why we start doing it is to be like, I have these things that I have to express them. I have to say the things that I'm feeling so they don't eat me alive. And so, but at the same time, it's like, and ironically, we have almost no life experience to draw from relative to somebody who's 65 and still writing songs. Like, but I think but it also, I don't know. But that's just the way of things. That's just, I think that's just how we're wired for whatever reason. And eventually we start to figure out, it doesn't have to be me all the time. And the reward of continuing to write songs, is greater than feeling like you have to be sort of like focused on your own stuff constantly.
And it's weird too because I mean I consider myself a performer as well.
Sure.
And so the fact that even though I myself don't have these feelings of, I don't know, I wrote a song about like drug addiction. I don't do drugs. I don't even drink coffee. Like but I saw where the emotional context was and I reached for it and I have seen things that people have said that have been involved in that. And so it's like, I like expressing that emotion, even if it's not my own experience. And so part of my performance is kind of being an actor.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, I'm sad in this situation.
Yeah.
Even though it's not me, nor has it ever been me, or probably not ever will be me.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting, it's an interesting thing that like, I feel like we probably don't talk about it enough. Like, as the idea of like, well, if you're gonna perform your own songs, like let's really think about the idea of like, what performance means, and like, are you, is there some place in there where you're gonna have to be like, I'm gonna have to make a conscious choice to, you know, sing or do or act or this thing a certain
Right.
way in order to get across the idea that I'm trying
Mhm.
to communicate. And it's funny how like I think there are people, I don't know that you said this, but there are definitely people, over the last, 5 to 7 years, who we would meet, we would get to know each other a little bit.
Mhm.
And then they would come to a Dr. Pants show,
Mhm.
and then and afterward they would be like, gosh, you're so much different up there. Like, I don't, like, I feel like I don't really know you. Like, and I'm like, well, that's why it's called
Yeah.
performing. Like, and I think that, and it took me a while to kind of to grow into being the performer that I
Mm.
am or have been for the past, I'd say 10 to 12 years. But like, I, but at the same time, like it's just the more I thought about like, okay, how do I take, this music I've written and really sort of, bring it to life in the
Yeah.
way where it makes the impact that I want it to. And the answer was, well, you've got to beef up, like
Yeah.
you've got to, present it in such a way where it's like, it's clear that no, this,
Mhm.
this exists, or it's somehow clear why, even I don't know how clear anybody can be on the why of like, certain songs that I write, but like, I mean, but at least like I've got to be up there, making a case for like why I believe in this ludicrous thing
Yeah.
that I'm doing, so you should too.
And that is an interesting thing about music specifically compared to like lots of other different art forms. Like
Right.
if you're a writer, you don't have to perform
Right. Yeah.
your writing. If you're a visual artist, if you're a painter
No.
or something, you don't have to
Yeah.
perform that painting. You can
Yeah.
feel the emotion and express it in that way, but you don't have to go back into that position
Yeah.
to make it happen. And so
Yeah.
music being a temporal thing, we sort of do have to
Yeah.
recreate that. And so
Yeah, and it's strange. I mean, there are moments where like, and some and things about that, and things about the idea of, sort of, it's there. It's funny where like I go back and forth. There are moments where like I don't. Part of me doesn't even see the point in, continuing to perform like the same pieces of music like over and over again, because it's like, well, we've kind of explored all the options
Yeah, yeah.
there, and like we could probably put that to bed. But then, and at the same time, and there's part of me that's like, we should do more things the collective we, I don't know who we is, but like we should do more things that are more spontaneous and improvised, and are things that like, are brand new in the moment, and this and that, whatever. And then there are other moments where I'm like, I don't know if I see the point in improvising, like, because that you're not actually, you're not committing to like, I want to create this thing that looks like this and has these characteristics, and like, is this for a reason, like, and blah blah blah. Like, and it's weird. I bouncing back and forth between those extremes, and
Yeah.
because ultimately, like, especially, up until now, like, I've always been someone who like, there are elements of the music I make that are composed, and then there are elements that I designed to be improvised. And, even if it's just like, oh, that guitar solo for 8 bars or whatever it is, like, and then it's funny how like, just the older I get, the more like I have these moments where I'm starting, where I question like, why do I do this part again? Like, why do I do it like that? Does that really, is that really my creative work doing everything that I want it to do? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, because, and there was a while there where like in 2014, like I made a conscious choice to sort of just not do Dr. Pants shows for a while. And like, I didn't really have, any ideas for songs per se. And I was just like, maybe, I was like, maybe next, by the end of the year, I'll write a half dozen new Dr. Pants songs. But I was like, but I really don't think so. And I didn't. But then, of course, in the fall of 2014, I started grad school, and so like ended up, being in a totally different creative space for a good long while. But yeah, but then once I got out of grad school, I was like, no, I'm pretty sure I know that like this thing that we call Dr. Pants should continue, but at the same time being aware that like, it will continue, but it won't necessarily look exactly like it has looked, and that's fine. And but yeah, it's
yeah, and maybe eventually I mean, one of my favorite artists recently that I've been inspired by is Moses Sumney. I don't know if you've
I'm
ever
not familiar with
him.
him.
But he only has one album out, but he's been performing for like years now.
Sure.
But every time that he performs it is something just slightly different.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah.
And it's really cool because, I mean, one, there's a whole bunch of different versions of it on YouTube.
Sure, yeah.
And so like, there's the album version of Quarrel, but then there's this version where instead of one harp, there's 3 harps and no other instruments. And then there's this other version where it's like with a saxophone and a guitar and a synth or something. And so it's like just simply in arrangement, but also just what else that he can do with the music is really cool. And so it's kind of something that I was looking at whenever I was preparing for this set is that, like, my usual people that I have for my band weren't able to make it. And so what can I do?
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, and for me, that's, well, and it's funny how I've managed to go this whole podcast without mentioning Frank Zappa one time. Cause yeah. So here it is. But I mean, and of course he's an inspiration for me and someone I look up to for all kinds of musical reasons. But he was one of those people who every time he went out on tour, a lot of times if there was a song, like he went back to an older song from, 10, 15 years earlier, like it would, he would change up the arrangement. He would do something different with it. Oh, now we have the reggae version, or we have, whatever. Like, and it was, and he would, and, part of that was, probably to keep himself interested, but then part of it was also like, he felt like his audience were the kind of audience that like, would always appreciate sort of the new spin on things. And, and that's, and I'm trying to make myself more open to that. Cause sometimes with certain songs, like it's kind of hard to let go of it being what it was, because I really, really, really liked what it was when we did it like that on the record and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, like, especially if you are working with live musicians, like you have to sort of be okay with the idea. It's like, well, they're inevitably going to screw with your thing anyway. And so, it's like, okay, so at least be open to the idea that like they might make it more interesting in some way, at least in that moment. And,
some of my rehearsals have been like, in this part, do this ish, but like keep going, I guess.
Right. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Like, Donuts is one of those songs that I just, I keep playing But like there have been all sorts of different versions of donuts now. Like every configuration of the Electric Dr. Pants band has played it a little bit differently, and and I've done versions where like with just two acoustic guitars, and I've done I've done a version where like I just do the rap part and then I play the little melody on a melodica in between, like, and it's one of those songs that, it's one of those songs that by its nature is a little bit malleable, and and it doesn't have to be this. The point gets across almost no matter what, but at the same time, like, even just having had that experience with that song makes me a little bit more open to like, we could mess with some of the other ones more, and it wouldn't be too big a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I'm sure people particularly enjoy receiving donuts.
well,
donuts.
sure. Yeah. Like, I don't care what it sounds like as long as he throws me a donut.
Anyways, given the time that it is,
yes.
And thank you for doing this with me.
Sure. Yeah. It was really enjoyable.
Once again, like it's a pleasure for me to have, it's not often that I get teachers, but it's good to make friends because
True.
It's weird because I don't know, a lot of times you go to school and it's like, there's this teacher side and then there's the friend side, and those two never shall meet.
Right. Yeah, I'm one of those people that like I kind of look forward to, in some ways, some of my students graduating, because it's like then it doesn't have to be weird anymore.
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh, we can just talk and just be people, and it's not. There's not like, oh, but that person's my teacher. This is weird for some reason, and so I totally get that. So,
so one more time, plug your stuff.
Right. So drpants.com, DOCTOR pants.com needs some work, but I'm getting to it. All the music, the best place to go is Bandcamp, which is drpants.bandcamp.com, and then all the social medias. Facebook.com/drpantsmusic, @drpants on Twitter, @drpants5 on Instagram and YouTube. Those are all the important ones. And then Dr. Pants Full Electric Band at the Root on June 30th. And there's other things after that. We're playing the Red Brick Nights in Guthrie in August. And then later in August, I'm back at the Root, but I'm back at the Root doing an acoustic duo show with Jared Lakites from Lunar Laugh, which I'm really excited about. We're already scheming about some of the things we want to do. So yeah, and then hopefully, other things to come. But nothing else concrete that I can plug right now.
Yeah, and so lastly, I'm Santiago Ramones.
And I'm David Broyles, Dr. Pants.
You can find everything that I do on my website, santiagoramones.com.
Go find it.
Yeah. You can listen to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, on Stitcher, or straight through my website.
Don't be like me. Go listen to more podcasts.
And you can comment and leave reviews, because it's nice to know that people like it. At this point, it'd be nice to know if people were like, I don't like it.
Right.
Because, like, I don't know. I also make music. You can download my demo called Songs with Words, and you can pay zero money or lots of money, whatever you want to do with that. I always end my podcast with my 3 things. They shape my life philosophy. Those 3 things are: love never fails, it's going to be okay, I might be wrong.